Hello, Erin. Shall I go ahead and start, Lucky?
Yeah, I think we can start
Okay.
up.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Dr. Krishna Kalluri, alternate counselor of the Southern California local section of the American Chemical Society, and we are doing a lot of celebrations this year. The American Chemical Society is celebrating its 250th anniversary. It was founded in 1876 under the mandate of the Congress. And our local section is celebrating its 115th anniversary. And we are celebrating the Chemistry Week, the Earth Week, I should say. And before I actually introduce today's speaker, I would like to tell you a very brief story about how I gotten into inviting today's speaker to give the seminar, which is very interesting and a very, very interesting topic. Actually, there was a webinar, I should say, conducted by the American Chemical Society on February 6th, uh, with collaboration from the Science History Institute of Philadelphia. And the topic, it was actually in celebration of the Valentine's Day. And the topic was actually the chemistry of romance, flavor, and drinks, roses, chocolates, and wine. That was the topic. And the focus was the molecular architecture of aroma, flavor, and sensory experiences of chocolate, wine, and roses. And there were three speakers there. One master flavorist, his name is Sam Thorpe, then essential oil expert Kim Blyman, and a chocolate wine pairing guide Jim St. John. And the the portion of the talk by Kim Blyman caught my eye. quite a bit because he owns an industry or he runs an industry called Berger in New Jersey. And he told that the rose oil business on which he was talking about is a $3 or $4 billion industry. And the share of America is very, very small there compared to the most uh, uh, most largest supplier of the rose oil, Bulgaria, which has a business of about $2 billion on rose oil, which I never heard of until I heard that particular talk by Blyman. And he said 350 kilos of the petals of roses gives you 1 kilo of oil, and that means actually that many kilos of the petals, petals are needed to just generate 1 kilo of oil, which values at several $1 million actually. So here is an opportunity for our younger chemistry high school guys who are listening to that if you want to get into this kind of business, that will be very lucrative. Now, that was the focus. That was actually the impetus for me to organize this particular seminar. And the speaker belongs to the American College of Healthcare Sciences. And I will talk a little bit about that. It is a private, for-profit online college. It's an online college headquartered in Portland, Oregon, that specializes in holistic health education. Founded in New Zealand actually in 1978, this college opened its doors in United States in 1989. Today, it remains one of the few accredited colleges specializing in online holistic health education, offering undergraduate and graduate certificate, diploma, and degree programs, and professional continuing education. And the statistics tell that there are 741 students and 470 undergraduates who are enrolled in this particular college. So, with that background, I would just like to introduce the speaker for today's seminar. Amanda Lattin is the Dean of Aromatherapy at the American College of Healthcare Sciences and Vice President of the Alliance of International Aromatherapists. She is an educator, clinician, and researcher with extensive experience in aromatherapy, herbal medicine, and phytochemistry. Amanda has designed and taught curriculum in chemistry, phytochemistry, aromatherapy, and botanical medicine across multiple institutions, including the American College in Portland and the Traditional Roots Institute at the National University of Natural Medicine. Their scholarly work focuses on the therapeutic applications of essential oils and advancing a theoretical framework for researching aromatherapy through the lens of scientific holism, integrating biochemical, physiological, and whole person health perspectives. She has published and presented on aromatherapy's role in integrative health and evidence informed practice. In addition to her academic work, Amanda has maintained a clinical aromatherapy and herbal medicine practice in Portland since 2007, collaborating with integrative health clinics and practitioners to incorporate botanical medicine into comprehensive client care. Her work bridges scientific rigor, clinical application, and holistic wellness with a focus on translating plant chemistry into meaningful health outcomes. Now, over to Amanda to start her presentation.
Thank you so much for a wonderful introduction, and thank you all for being here today with me. I'm excited to explore this topic together. And I really want to ask for you to put as many questions as you like in the chat. We have a few built-in opportunities for QA, but I have found that the more questions that are asked, the better conversation and presentation we have. So please feel free to ask away. I'll do my best to keep an eye on the chat, or perhaps if need be, someone else can keep me in the loop. So today we're going to celebrate Earth Week together. We're looking at Into the Woods and Beyond, and I was just so thrilled for American Chemical Society to have the theme of Into the Woods with Chemistry. I love that. This is what I do every day, is working with that aspect of chemistry. So I thought we would focus a little bit around essential oils and the chemistry of forest bathing. So today we're going to look at the science behind the concept of forest bathing, what it is, how it creates effects, some of the effects that we see in research, and also, how can we recreate this for ourselves indoors? So where does this overlap with essential oils and aromatherapy? And yes, we can talk about the essential oils. I loved the looking at the rose essential oil. You picked out one of the most expensive essential oils in the world to highlight there, and it does require an incredible amount of plant matter to create that essential oil. So we can just dive right in. Again, please feel free to ask me questions. I feel like this skipped my learning outcomes. So first, I want to look at the science of forest bathing. This term, you may have heard it in Japanese. It's referred to as Shinrin Yoku. But before we get started, I want to just take a quick poll. How often do you spend intentional time outdoors? So, not just walking outside to your car or walking through a parking lot, but I just wanted to get a feel here, like how often in our audience do you spend intentional time outside? Is it daily, weekly, rarely, or sometimes maybe for some of you, it's almost never? So before we go into looking at this concept, let's just take a quick self-check here and see. We got a lot of people daily. Let's see what we count as intentional time outdoors. Weekly, I like seeing that. Giving ourselves some high ratings here. Okay, I like it. We got some outdoor people going here. It's amazing how it can sneak up on you depending on what your work role is or your living situation, if you may need to really make an intentional habit of spending out time outdoors. But what are the benefits of doing that? Let's take a look. So today we're going to explain the role of forest-derived volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. Particularly, we're going to look at some monoterpenes and sesquiterpenes today in the physiological and psychological effects of Shinrin Yoku, also known as forest bathing. You might also see this referred to in research as forest medicine or forest therapy. And, depending on which culture the research is done through, all those terms can be somewhat interchangeable. We're going to look at the multisensory exposure, including olfactory, visual, auditory, and tactile input during tributes to the therapeutic effects that we see from this practice. We're also going to look at some of the current research results on forest bathing and aromatherapy, looking at, the measurable effects of forest bathing that can also be replicated in many ways with aromatherapy, including cortisol reduction, parasympathetic nervous system activity, and mood regulation. And then how can we recreate some of these effects indoors using essential oils and strategies to personalize that or to create an indoor forest bathing effect? To complement what many of you seem to already be doing, which is spending quite a bit of time outdoors. So what is Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing? And that name and that term originally was derived in Japan in the early 1980s. And it's looking at intentional full sensory immersion in a forest environment without an additional goal beyond noticing the sensory experience. So this is different than coming into a forest setting and perhaps you're really focused on a particular activity in that forest setting that is really grabbing your attention, and that's your reason for being in the forest setting. Maybe you're, on a particular mountain biking thing, or maybe you're engaged in a specific sport and you're really focused, your sensory input and your goals for being in that environment are really focused around that activity. That's maybe not going to produce the same effects as what we're going to look at, what we would consider forest bathing or forest therapy. It's not to say that it won't have any kind of effect on you, but really, when we're talking about forest bathing, the reason for the individual being in the forest is to notice their sensory experience in that environment. Now, these practices can be integrated into other forest-based activities. So we can merge this with hiking or walking. It's also been studied where yoga has been integrated into the forest bathing experience, meditation, and mindfulness practice. So it doesn't have to just be simply sitting or standing in the forest. We can certainly integrate that with some of these other low impact type of activities. And this a lot of times also aligns with the individual's culture. So these other additional practices, typically when they're researched, are researched within the context of that culture and really helping to create a way for people to be present in this multisensory immersion experience in the forest. Because when forest bathing or forest therapy is studied, we're really looking at maybe 2 to 4 hours of this time in the forest. I've seen some research start as early as 30 minutes, but really the immersion in that environment and the sensory input, we're really looking at a little bit of a longer period of time. And so, depending on the individual's culture, they may need to have some more structured activity within that forest bathing or forest therapy context in order to stay in that space. And so you might see that accompanied with the hiking, the walking, yoga, meditation, or mindfulness practices, which those by themselves also have health benefits. And then when they're paired together, they can amplify or have synergistic effects with one another. So that's what we're looking at today. So how does forest bathing reduce stress? And there are several aspects of this. It's important to recognize that forest bathing produces effects through sensory input from all 5 senses. So when we're in a forest environment, we're not seeing any man-made structures. Um, the angles that nature produces are very different than what humans produce in their own architecture. The way that light moves through a forest environment is very different, and our nervous system is going to perceive that. So it's not just something you're smelling or what you're looking at, but it really is completely different sensory input from all 5 senses that produces the effects that we see from forest bathing. So visually, like I said, we're going to be looking at very different angles. We're going to be looking at different texture and color compositions. We're going to be having different interaction with light as it moves through a natural environment. We're going to be hearing different sounds, including wind movement, which also produces a tactile sensation. We're going to be hearing animals or other nature sounds. Perhaps water is also in the landscape. So that's going to be a different auditory experience. We're going to have different tactile experiences. The air is going to feel different in a forest environment than an indoor environment or a cityscape environment. We're going to touch plants, hopefully safe ones. Maybe we're touching the soil, maybe we're touching rocks, maybe we're interacting with the water that may be present. That's all different tactile sensations. And then an area that this lecture is really going to focus on is in the smell and taste area of the sensory input. And it's so interesting to see research in these areas because we have scientists from many different backgrounds who are researching this, and sometimes you can tell they don't have a strong background in sense of smell. But smell and taste are very much so linked together. So our primary sense of smell, and we'll talk more about this in the presentation, is connected to our olfactory receptors in our nose, which are our fastest sense two synapses to the brain. They speak directly to the twin olfactory bulbs, which then speaks to our limbic system and our other brain regions and our nervous and endocrine system, and we'll talk about that. But we also recruit our trigeminal nerve when we smell certain aromas. We also can recruit some aspects of taste when we're smelling an aroma. So when you're outside and you're breathing in air, and we're going to look at some of these aspects in a little bit, these variables, the air that you're breathing has a different composition than the air that you would breathe in an indoor environment or a cityscape environment. And that not only produces a different smell sensation, it produces a different taste sensation just through the different air that you are breathing. So it doesn't mean that you have to go into the forest environment and taste the trees or taste the soil or eat food from that environment. The taste component often comes from the air that you are breathing. So this has been studied. You really do need input from all five senses being immersed in the forest environment to produce the therapeutic outcomes, the complete therapeutic outcomes that we see from forest bathing or forest therapy. And predominantly, these therapeutic effects come from increased parasympathetic nervous system activity. And from there, there's a cascade effect that we see in several areas. A big component of this are the forest VOCs, especially terpenes that are emitted from different sources within the forest. That, as I said, they're going to shape the aroma and the subtle taste of the forest air. And that provides different sensory input. So we start having a different perception of our environment. And this goes back to psychoneuroimmunology, where our immune system function is very much so directly correlated to our perception of the environment being safe or not safe in very broad categories. And this type of sensory input signals to our system a sense of safety for the most part. And this is also very interesting too. That's been researched, do all forest environments produce this effect? And the answer can be no. For instance, the spacing of the trees that are there. If the trees are too close in, then people can perceive that as a sense of danger. And they may feel unsafe in that forest environment, and it might not be an ideal forest bathing environment to be in, for an example. But in general, all that type of sensory input that I just described, and especially these VOCs, are designed to be communicator molecules for the plants. That's what they're designed for. You might see them in literature described as phytoncides, which is really just basically plant antimicrobials, and that certainly is one of their therapeutic effects, but they have many other therapeutic effects, predominantly around communication. They're designed to communicate with, for the plants, use them to communicate with the soil, to communicate with other insects, other plants, and other mammals. And our system also can respond to VOCs as communicator molecules, predominantly for our nervous and endocrine system. And then that produces full body responses. So that's where we start getting into influences around stress levels, around our nervous system regulation, and our immune function. So as our system perceives safety in the environment through sensory input, that will directly support immune function. When our system feels it's in an unsafe environment, that negatively impacts immune function. And stress and immune function are linked together through that same mechanism. So we can perceive chronic stress as a threat to our safety. So it's interesting though, because we've been conditioned to kind of normalize stress, right? But being able to have stress recovery periods is hugely important for our full system health and especially our immune function. So we can have direct biochemical effects from breathing in VOCs. So they can have, direct biochemical therapeutic effects on the tissues that they're going to interact with, which would be your lungs. They're going to go right into the bloodstream through the lungs and interact with the brain, crossing the blood-brain barrier. So lungs, heart, brain, they're going to get those really quickly. And then we know if you're in that forest environment for several hours, as we're describing, you might get enough to, have contact with other tissues, but predominantly those are going to be the areas that have a high impact from breathing in this forest air, and that can produce therapeutic effects directly. And then, as I said, through the signaling, through the olfaction, we would see subsequent actions. So over time, the research shows us that, let's say that you did forest bathing once a week for 4 weeks, that it can produce a broader effect over time, or a cumulative effect over time. And this is really the goal, is to start working with some of these chronic effects of stress and lack of stress recovery. So any questions for me on here, on this area? No, don't be quiet though. Please ask me questions. So, what does the evidence show us happens when we regularly participate in forest bathing? So, you can see effects through one session of forest bathing or forest therapy. But as I said, ideally, a person would interact with this practice on a regular to semi-regular basis. For example, once a week for a month would be a really nice approach that's looked at in research. And then maybe the person might try to maintain those effects by practicing it once a month, for example. So forest environments, what we see come out of it is a lowered heart rate. We see lower blood pressure. We see measurable changes in cortisol levels. We see lower cortisol levels happen. We also see decreases in pro-inflammatory molecules of chronic markers of chronic inflammation, such as our C-reactive protein, interleukin 6 and 8, our TNF. All of those we've measured in research to be reduced after a forest bathing session. And those are maintained with subsequent forest bathing sessions. And as we know, that chronic inflammation, and this really affects the cardiovascular system, this really affects the immune function, and brain health. And these are areas where we are seeing chronic health problems at a population level. So this is not really something that's necessarily designed for an acute situation, although perhaps if somebody was really having acute mental or emotional, this might be something that they would use for an acute support there, but it's really meant to be a long-term support for chronic health support. Quiet crowd. I hope are we interested? Can someone at least give me that? Or is this the lecture you were expecting? Thank you, Erin, for the thumbs up. I appreciate it. So trees release monoterpenes, and we're going to look at these today. Alpha pinene, beta pinene, limonene are really common ones, which we know have anxiolytic properties. And this is also what we utilize them for within the practice of aromatherapy. So if you are working in medicine, you know that what I just talked about in pharmacy, they really want ways to manage this, and those therapeutic outcomes are phenomenal considering how non-invasive, right? This is a completely non-invasive, safe intervention for an individual to see such measurable outcomes come out of it. So it's really a beautiful opportunity here. So American Chemical Society, we have to take a look at forest chemistry, of course. Okay, I do have a question. Wonderful. I have recently seen evidence that bird song from local birds has a greater therapeutic effect than exotic bird song, such as in the rainforest. Is there any evidence that this is more generally true Is bathing in a local forest more therapeutic than traveling to an exotic forest location? That is such a great idea. And we are going to take a look at, what creates different types of forest environments so that you can start looking at the types of forests that are around you. And get an idea of maybe what their therapeutic potential is. And this is kind of where the research is at in this area is there any therapeutic difference from forest bathing in different types of forest settings? And the short answer so far is yes, although they are all beneficial. And this is the overlap in our area where um, for example, in aromatherapy, every citrus essential oil is viewed as having its own therapeutic profile. But in industry, all the citrus essential oils are kind of seen as interchangeable with one another. And it could be that you think, well, one forest is the same as another forest. But in fact, the chemistry that they produce and the cumulative effect that they produce are quite different. So, from a plant medicine point of view, there could be benefits to using your local environment versus needing to go to a different environment. But I would say that you want the natural environment that you are living in. You want to go and experience that environment because it's responding to the same environment that you are responding to. And so the plants are basically going to be producing the therapeutic profile that is most going to align with the environment that you are navigating. Um, Occasionally, you could go having a drastic change of environment could be its own therapeutic approach. But I would say my recommendation would be just as we see with food, is that we really want to interact with our local microbiome, if you will, and have that as a starting place. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay, so let's take a look here at forest chemistry. So, forest VOC sources and variability. Are all forest environments the same and do they stay the same? And the answer is no. These are very dynamic, living situations that are responding to the environment. So when we distill essential oils, and usually they're on an annual harvest, so usually each plant species has an ideal time to be harvested and distilled for its essential oil. And while we know that there are markers for those essential oils in their constituent profiles, they change a little bit year to year. And this is due to the plant responding to the environment real time. And because the plant produces these specific molecules, as I said, it's their defense system against diseases, against predators. It's also a communication system to attract pollinators, to interact with insects and mammals and other plants. And is also part of the way that, sometimes they use it to prevent too much water evaporating out of their leaves, to fight off competing vegetation. So because plants are, they're not mobile, they have to have a complete biochemical communication arsenal, if you will, to interact with the environment that they are in to have their needs met. So the sources of volatile organic compounds, and when we say volatile, these are really small compounds. So they might have 5 to maybe 25 carbons typically in order to be light enough to be volatile, to move freely through the air, which would then allow them to reach our olfactory receptors, which is what's going to give them aroma to us. Now, the primary place that these are emitted in the forest are from tree leaves, needles, the bark of trees, and the wood. So that's the primary place that the forest air is going to get these from. However, they're not the only sources of them in the forest. The soil microbes themselves also produce volatile organic compounds, which actually talk to the tree roots and stimulate them. And sometimes the trees absorb those VOCs from the microbes and the fungi in the soil. and also the understory vegetation of the forest. So when you're walking through the forest, you're smelling, at each level in the forest, you might actually get a different aroma or different composition of VOCs, and they're all interacting with one another to produce that full effect. And that's why I said the air literally is going to feel different, it's going to smell different, and it's going to taste different because it has a much different composition than indoor air or cityscape air. And as you're walking through the forest and your feet are is moving the soil, you're going to be releasing those VOCs from the soil. Those are going to come up. You're also going to be interacting with the understory VOCs and then the trees themselves, which are the main sources of them. Depending on which species are growing in the forest, we're going to see, and this has been shown in research, we're going to see a different profile of VOCs, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. The conifer forests tend to be predominant in monoterpenes. The cypress and cedar dominant forests tend to have higher levels of sesquiterpenes. And then deciduous forests, they tend to have more of the sesquiterpenes that are coming up from the soil being in the air. And then they have some really interesting, you might just see like actual just isoprene, the 5 carbon chain isoprene, and then some aldehydes and some esters. And it's not as predominant with the monoterpenes in a deciduous forest. It has more of these molecules that we describe as a green aroma present. And deciduous trees typically except for with a few exceptions, are not distilled for their essential oil. But birch and poplar, their tree bark can be distilled for essential oil. So we get more of our essential oils from conifer trees, Pinaceae type of trees, and the cypress cedar, Cupressaceae family trees than from our deciduous trees. What also can create variability is environmental factors. So usually increased temperature and sunlight, we're going to see more VOCs present in the air. Sometimes higher humidity levels can also produce that. And then depending on how much air movement there is or what kind of canopy the forest has is also going to determine, how many VOCs are present on any given day. And it changes day to day and it changes during the time of day. So the best time of day to really interact with that full forest VOC profile is either going to be midday to early afternoon or early morning. The lowest point of the day is late afternoon to early evening. So if you're going to do forest bathing, to really interact with that full sensory profile, early morning or midday to early afternoon would be your peak opportunities to really interact with that VOC profile. Any questions here? Okay. Did any of you know that the forest air changed so frequently? I
You
find it.
lost my question at the end, Amanda.
Oh no, I'm going to keep everybody's brains going the whole time.
Okay.
All right. So what are volatile organic compounds and why do trees make them? And which ones are we really talking about? So there's been some interesting research coming out trying to really see like what are our top, what are the top VOCs that we see in forest air. And this can be in alignment with what we might see in a distilled essential oil, or it can be a little bit different. In aromatherapy, we call this the head space of a species, and that's what it's just kind of releasing into the air around that. And that can be a little bit different than what we might capture when we distill the plant. So what's been stored in the plant itself that we're able to capture through distillation. But as I mentioned, plants produce these. These are secondary plant metabolites that are produced with intention. It used to be they were thought to be waste molecules inside of a plant, but we know now that that's not true. They do produce them as part of their own immune function, their communication system, and it is very much so in response to the environment. So you might think, harsher conditions might lower the amount of VOCs produced by a plant, but oftentimes environmental stressors can actually increase their production because the plant's using them to care for themselves. So, similar to us, when we're under stress, we might need more of this type of biochemical support to help get us through stressors. So, these are 5 molecules that I picked here that are routinely in the top, let's say, 10 molecules that you might see in forest air that also overlapped with what we see in essential oils. So alpha and beta pinene are always really at the top. Maybe sometimes within the forest air themselves, there might be, like I said, some isoprene or some specific aldehydes or esters that we don't see in essential oils. But alpha and beta pinene are foundational aspects of forest air chemistry and in terms of what we're going to be able to smell. They're very small molecules. They're present predominantly in pine, fir, and cypress. So most of our conifer essential oils. So if you were going into a conifer heavy forest, you're going to be interacting with a lot of alpha and beta pinene. And we would describe this therapeutically as supporting calm mental clarity. They have antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and neuroprotective effects, and they tend to be somewhat mucolytic. So they tend to help clear out the lungs and the airways. Limonene is another very common monoterpene that we find in forest air. It's present, we recognize it from citrus peels, but it's very present in conifer-based forest and essential oils. And this has a stimulating effect, so it helps to reduce mental fatigue. It has an uplifting antidepressant effect, typically on our mood. And it also has anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial effects. And it has a citrus aroma. And then beta caryophyllene, it's common. This is a sesquiterpene constituent. It's common in Pinaceae and Cupressaceae family species. So this is a little bit of a different, it has 15 carbons instead of the 10 carbons, and it has a calming action. Not a sedative action necessarily, but a calming action. Therapeutically, we see it to have antioxidant, immunomodulatory, antimicrobial, and anti-inflammatory. So you can see all of these have anti-inflammatory actions that we were talking about at the beginning of the presentation. And then finally, bornyl acetate is another very common forest air VOC that we find, especially in fir oils. It's very relaxing and tension reducing, and it has a sedative action and also anti-inflammatory, neuroprotective, and immunomodulator. So you can see here overlapping, looking at the research on these individual constituents that have been researched, but they're also being found to be predominant in forest air profiles, in the VOC profiles of forest air. We can kind of start to see a picture of what we might find in forest air chemistry. And not to say this is all of it. One essential oil is going to range anywhere from, let's say, 90 to 300 constituents. So the essential oil of one plant can range from about 90 to maybe 300 different constituents. The rose oil mentioned at the beginning of the lecture has about 300 different constituents in it, whereas a pine essential oil might have around 100 constituents. So when we really look at the profile of forest air, please realize it's going to be very complex. And that's kind of the goal, because we don't want our system to be able to identify and target just one thing. In nature, we see these complex profiles, so many different constituents in small amounts, produces a non-toxic profile, and it produces more of a holistic response from the living organisms that interact with it, rather than just one targeted. This is just one aroma, one molecule that you're interacting with in a high amount. So if we looked at the whole picture, we would have to look at many hundreds of different constituents that are going to be present to produce the aroma of the forest. But certainly these are pillars of what we might find if we were able to do that analysis in a forest environment. So here are the structures of what I was just looking at. Now, I only put alpha pinene as a bicyclic monoterpene here. So for those of you who aren't familiar, terpenes are a really common class of organic compounds, and they're built out of isoprene units, which are 5 carbon building blocks. We find these all over the place in nature, including in the cell walls of bacteria, for example, and they make lots of beautiful structures. And plants have the machinery to produce many different types of terpenes, going all the way up to, their primary structures like lignin and wood. But some of these smaller molecules are produced much earlier in their metabolism pathways, and they're used for these purposes. So very small molecules. The pinene, like I said, is one of the most common forest VOCs. And it's fascinating, its structural isomer, beta pinene, is also very common. They both have, enantiomer versions, optical isomers. And what's so curious to me is if you went into a North American forest of the alpha pinene that was captured there would maybe have the R isomer, but if you went into a European forest, you might find the S isomer. And so we're actually able to tell, what type of forest, like what continent that pine oil might have come from based on just the optical isomers that the tree tended to produce of the pinene that was present. So it has a turpentine, woody, piney, resinous type of aroma that we might associate with being in the forest. Then limonene, one of the most common essential oil constituents across all different types of plant species. And it has a classic citrus aroma. So, what you might describe as a lemon or orange type of aroma. And it's really interesting. You don't expect that to be in a tree essential oil, but you get that lemony, piney, like what you might consider like with pine sol. It's those two, alpha pinene and limonene together. And the beta caryophyllene, it's a bicyclic sesquiterpene here. And what's interesting, so it has a little bit of a higher molecular weight. It has 15 carbons as opposed to the 10 carbons. And we will literally, humans will describe that as a heavier aroma. We perceive that difference in our senses of a larger molecule. We perceive it as smelling heavier. And this has a spicy, woody, dry, peppery type of aroma. And you actually do find it in black pepper essential oil, for example. And then the bornyl acetate is a monoterpene ester. We see here that ester functional group, bicyclic, just like the alpha pinene and beta caryophyllene. And it has a sweet, herbaceous, piney aroma. So it's a much softer aroma. Now you might be asking yourself, like, do we know what gives a molecule its aroma? And to be honest with you, that's still up for much debate. We have some patterns that we can see. For example, like I said, molecules that have a lower molecular weight, we tend to perceive them as having quote unquote lighter aromas. Like we perceive them as having a lighter or softer aroma. And molecules that have a heavier molecular weight, we might have a sensory experience of perceiving them as a heavier aroma. But we haven't been able to predict based on structure what a molecule will smell like. There's also the debate around if resonance creates the aroma, and there has been some experimentation trying to create predict what a scent will be of a scent molecule based on resonance. There's been a little bit of success with that, but this is very complex. And even, like I said, optical isomers can even have produce a different scent expression for it. So it's a very specific biochemical experience. And when you're in an environment with many different aroma molecules, we perceive that as an aroma print. And so, for example, the spaghetti sauce that your mom makes has its particular aroma, and then you're able to perceive that it's different than the spaghetti sauce that the restaurant down the street makes for you. So, to the question earlier, can our systems tell the difference between the forest environment that's close to us and one that's further away, even if there's some overlap in the types of trees that are present? The answer is yes. And that same forest is going to have a little bit of a different aroma profile depending on the day, the time of day, and what's happening in the environment. So, those subtle shifts, being able to let our systems respond to those subtle shifts in environment is actually very therapeutic for our system, is letting us connect with all of that sensory input that our systems are perceiving and responding to it. So, how does inhalation of forest VOCs affect the body? And this overlaps with, how do we see therapeutic effects in aromatherapy with essential oils? There's one of the top questions in my career is, isn't this just a placebo effect? And the answer is no. Smell does produce an effect on us, many effects on us, and it can be harnessed therapeutically. So we talked about our primary sense of smell being in our nose. We associate our nose as our, smell sense organ, our olfactory epithelium here, and it speaks to our olfactory bulb. And from there, it speaks to the limbic system. So our sense of smell is not gated by the thalamus like our other senses. It's just a direct perception, which is why a smell can be somewhat annoying, right? Because it's very difficult to gate it out. It takes a lot of time to go nose blind to a smell. And our limbic system is where a lot of our memory and emotion are stored and regulated. So you can definitely have an emotional response to a smell. It can also be connected. Each of our memories have a smell associated with them. So this can be very supportive therapeutically if done well, or it can be very triggering for an individual where a smell consciously or subconsciously might be reminding them of events. Sometimes that's a very good thing, and sometimes it can be reminding them of traumatic events, which might make a smell feel very triggering to them. So um, when we interact with an aroma, it doesn't have to be a forest aroma or an essential oil aroma. Our system is going to process it, where it's going to go through the olfactory epithelium to the twin olfactory bulbs. That sends, like I said, it's like a fingerprint image because we have many millions of these receptors, and we don't just smell one odorant at a time. We're going to smell many odorants at a time, and that sends kind of an image, an aroma image that gets sent to the brain, and it gets processed in the limbic system, and from there it's going to go to other brain centers, which then produces a full body nervous endocrine system response. Okay. And that's really how we're able to see these full body responses to an aroma, or in this case, forest bathing, but in other opportunities with aromatherapy. That's different than a pharmacological effect where you have enough of a particular substance in the bloodstream to then produce a mechanistic action. This is really, we're triggering the body to produce its own response, is really what the sense of smell is doing. And we're able to measure this metabolic response now in the urine. How am I doing on time? Doing okay? Oh, I need to go faster. So this is really fascinating stuff. If I don't get anything else across to you today, please know that it's not a placebo effect. You're actually having real nervous endocrine system responses to aromas. And sometimes those can be harnessed quite therapeutically. So I wanted to do a little quiz. We talked about these. If you could put in the chat Which of these constituents do you think you would want to be at the lead if you were going to go choose a forest environment to be in? Do you think you'd want to have a pinene predominant forest profile, or a limonene, or beta caryophyllene, or borneol acetate? Which one of these profiles do you think would be most in alignment with your forest bathing needs today? Pinene, I love it. Beta caryophyllene, I like the spicy. Borneol acetate is beautiful in fur oil. Alpha pinene, I like it. So you're going to be thinking about this next time you go out into the forest. So if we want to bring the forest indoors, how can we choose between the forest bathing and the aromatherapy? Because they can have overlaps in benefits. So forest bathing, like I said, it's really going to engage all five of our senses. We're going to get the lower cortisol levels, the reduced blood pressure, the anti-inflammatory effect, and the strengthened immune function, and really those more deep effects on our mental and mood state. So it's going to encourage mindfulness and our emotional balance. And aromatherapy can mimic some of this. So we can replicate those effects that we see from the nature VOC profile indoors, which can be very helpful if we need our indoor spaces to be a better environment for us. We can use essential oils that have documented stress relieving properties if we're going to use aromatherapy, or we can really tailor that to the needs of the individual. And this can also improve mood. It can promote stress recovery. And it can also, like I said, if we're looking at the psychoneuroimmunology aspect of this, if the indoor environment is not feeling safe in a broad sense, or stressful, we might use the term stressful, we can use aromatherapy and essential oils to change our perception of the environment through the olfaction mechanism that I was just talking about. And that can be empowering in its own way, right? So we can then start to maybe have some of that stress recovery without having to change environments. So when would we choose one over the other? Well, if you have access to parks or forest, I really encourage you, and I loved seeing that at the beginning of the lecture. So many of you are already doing this, but really try to spend, at more than half an hour fully immersed in that nature environment to start to see some of the effects we're talking about. Or if you're able to dedicate, even once a month, spending at least 2 hours fully immersed in that environment, that's where you're really going to start to see some of those more measurable, lasting stress relief that we're looking for. And also, if you're interested in cultivating nature-based mindfulness practices, building forest bathing or forest therapy into your self-care routine can be really beneficial, because we do see the long-term benefits of that. But if you're an urban dweller, if you have limited indoor outdoor access, maybe you have mobility challenges, you find that this might be hard to build in a full forest bathing into your routine. Or if you need something that's a more quick stress relief, we need to see the effect right now, then aromatherapy can be an alternative option where you can have some of the overlap uh, of the experience and therapeutic outcomes. So these are our forest VOC aligned essential oils. So if you're wondering which essential oils can I use to start to create an indoor forest bathing effect, then we can look at hinoki wood, which is a Japanese cypress, Scots pine, black spruce, cypress species, balsam fir, which grows quite a bit in the northern US and in Canada. You can get that US based. Virginian cedarwood also grows in North America. Eucalyptus, there's a number of eucalyptus species that grow in California. And then Atlas cedarwood does not grow in North America, but there are North American trees that there's some juniper species that grow in North America. So if you really even want to do the aromatherapy with local trees or trees native to the US or North America, that's definitely accessible. So this is the type of essential oil profile. And you might just pick two of these to work with. Like I said, try to create a layered effect. So diffusion guidelines, we don't need to diffuse all day. You really are going to see the best benefit from noticing a change in your sensory perception. So you can even do, 5 to 10 minute diffusions, and that's still going to produce effect. Typically, we diffuse essential oils for about 20 minutes, and that's going to produce the therapeutic effect that you're going for. And you don't want to do that more than maybe twice a day. So it's not necessary to run a diffuser for hours and hours. In fact, you stop responding to the essential oils after a period of time. You might try two different essential oils in combination if you're creating an indoor aromatherapy effect. For example, you might choose a grounding essential oil like fir or spruce with one uplifting note. So you're going to get a monoterpene predominant essential oil and a sesquiterpene predominant essential oil and use a little bit of both. And that's going to reproduce that complex forest profile that we were looking at together. I really encourage you to try to bring in some of that other sensory perception. If you're doing indoor forest bathing, maybe you play some nature sounds while you're doing that. Maybe you're going to sit by the window to have as much natural light as possible. Turn off your electronic devices and let yourself just have a different sensory perception. Even if you can only do it for 10 minutes, is really going to provide an opportunity for that stress recovery and nervous system and endocrine system response. You can follow it up with a cup of your favorite tea for that taste component if you want to, or you can also incorporate something that has a nature texture while you're doing your aromatherapy. So there's a lot of ways that you can add layers into an indoor forest bathing. I know we're close on time, so I don't want to go over time for anyone, but if you want to, we can look at our Q&A of, how do you think this might fit into your work or your personal needs, or if you have any questions about that. I realize we don't have time to do that here, but I was trying to guess who would be present for this presentation. I don't know, maybe I got it close. Do we have any STEM researchers or faculty or students present? And has this given you any ideas about how you might use this personally or professionally? So, to sum up, forest bathing reduces stress through measurable physiological changes. The forest air contains therapeutic plant compounds, volatile organic compounds. We looked at some of the key ones that you would find in the forest air. It's really fascinating, beautiful, complex structure there. We can use essential oils indoors to mimic some of the benefits that we would receive from forest bathing. To see the best benefits, you want to have that full sensory forest immersion with all five senses. But aromatherapy is a practical alternative or supplement in between our forest bathing. Thank you all so much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Let me see in the chat. So, okay, I did guess some of the people that were present here. I love seeing that. Do any of the students present, does anyone have any questions you would like me to go over? Scented candles are a wonderful way that homebound people, yes, and I encourage you to get ones that are scented with essential oils.
Do you have any data on blends as opposed to individual oils, Amanda?
Blends? Is
Yeah,
that what you said?
blends. Yeah, blend.
My whole life. Yes. So I recommend starting with equal parts of, like, if you picked two essential oils, I would recommend starting with equal parts of both and trying that first. And if you go to our my college, American College of Healthcare Sciences, we have a number of ebooks that you can download about blending essential oils with different blends. We have a lot of blogs that I've written with lots of different recipes. We have one of the top health and wellness blogs in the US, and we have lots of free resources. I'll put that link in the chat. So I have lots of blends, yes, but that would be a whole other presentation. And I'll also put my email in the chat if anybody has any additional questions that didn't get answered today. Do you suggest we change up the blends if we prefer to leave a diffuser on longer than 30 minutes? I really would recommend actually not leaving the diffuser on longer than 30 minutes. It's not going to produce a therapeutic outcome. And if we have overexposure to essential oils, then that's how we develop sensitivities to them. So, I would recommend diffusing and then taking a 1 to 2 hour break, and then you could diffuse again. If you're really needing a lot of that olfactory stimulation, then you might make an aromatherapy inhaler, or you might try to do just a couple of drops on some tissue and then just do some direct inhalation and then set it aside if you're needing to interact with that. That might be a better way to do that. But the constant diffusion actually becomes an irritant to our system over time. Um, Physiological measurements to determine efficacy. Well, one of the easiest ones that we can do at home is blood pressure and blood rate, or breathing rate, or respiratory rate. All of those are measurable changes for stress reduction after an aromatherapy intervention. So that would be
Couple of
a
other
great.
questions there.
Am I hitting all the questions?
Do you know what blends could be harmful for pets is one question. And does not a burning aroma candle also produce pollutant gases that are unfavorable? So that is the other question that I see in the chat.
Okay. So, cats are much less tolerant of essential oils than dogs. Cats do not have all the liver enzymes that are needed to be able to metabolize essential oils. So, it's important not to put essential oils on their bedding or in their litter boxes or around their litter boxes. Um, if you leave a window open or a door open, allow them to leave the room. If you're diffusing, then that's a good way to protect your cats. And essential oils that are higher in monoterpenols, such as lavender, geranium, neroli, tend to be less toxic for them. Dogs are a little bit more tolerant. They have more of the liver enzymes. So that would be my quick answer to that. And it really depends on what the candle is made out of, what kind of waxes were used to make it, and what was used to scent it will really determine, you know, what it's off-gassing as it's being burned. So it can be, the answer is it can be, or you can get candles that burn quite cleanly. We prefer diffusing in aromatherapy, so there's no heat involved. So we're trying to reduce changing, the structure of the constituents. So in aromatherapy, we tend to use non-heat ways to diffuse it, but there are methods to create cleaner candles.
There's another question here. I get migraines and can't breathe if anyone uses manufactured air fresheners. Why are they so toxic as compared to natural essential oils?
Yeah. So air fresheners tend to use synthetically produced aroma molecules rather than natural aroma molecules. Also, as I was talking about in the lecture, if we use essential oils, we're getting low amounts of many constituents rather than high amounts of a few constituents. And so when we interact with it, that produces, like I said, it's a non-toxic interaction. Our bodies tend to react more when there's a lot of one particular thing and it's an irritant. And so it can produce, and it's not to say people can't have reactions to essential oils, because they can, but we tend to see less reactivity to interacting with a completely natural essential oil as opposed to synthetic odor molecules. But people can have reactions to both, certainly.
Well,
Mhm.
there are no further questions. And if there are any questions, Amanda has already given her email address. You can email her, and I think she will be gracious enough to answer the questions. And It is my pleasant duty to thank Amanda for a wonderful, wonderful seminar. It is much, much better than the Valentine seminar that I heard of in February, which motivated me to actually invite Amanda. But actually, I think I learned a lot more here than I learned there, except that we can make money, money with that in the other seminar. Thank you very much, Amanda, and I am sure our chemists will benefit and will think a lot about uh, working in new directions using your thoughts and your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
My class would like to say thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for coming.
So those are the students actually who listen to you. They are clapping.
I'm so excited. I can't wait. Send me your forest bathing experiences. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye then, everybody. Hi, Glendy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Krishna, I'm here.
I just wanted to say we'll be seeing you guys on May 26th again. That's
Yes,
what
thank you.
I said. Thank you.
Yes, and I emailed you. Just check your email later.
Yeah, you have some pictures, don't you? Yeah,
I have what?
some pictures.
Oh, yes, yes. I'll send them
Yeah.
over.
Right. Oh, thank you.
Okay. Thank
Bye.
you. Have a good
Bye.
Thank
one.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Lucky.
Problem. It was really